I am talking on mute apparently. Sorry, I always do that. Hello is what I was saying, and welcome everyone. You didn't hear my missed speeches, which is great. This is February's SUD Community Workshop. We are so excited to have you here. Our topic today is PTSD and moral injury, presented by our Veterans and Military's Family Navigator, Chaka McDonald. We are excited to have this topic. As I was saying, you do get 1.5 McBack related CEU credits if you attend for the full training and complete the evaluation, which we will send to you via the chat and a QR code at the end for you to utilize. That eval, I will remind you again, but the end, it does close tomorrow morning. So we do stay on to make sure that we can navigate any technology issues that might be. In the meantime, please use the chat feature to ask any questions that you may have that might be brought up during this training, or use the raise your hand feature and we will call upon you during the natural pauses and things of that nature. Just excuse me for 1 second. Sorry about a little minor interruption really quick. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to our presenter here, Chaka McDonald, as he presents to you all on PTSD and moral injuries. And at the end, we'll do a little housekeeping about next or April's community workshop and things of that nature. But we look forward to our topic today. Welcome, everybody.
Hey, thank you, Anna. Thank you, Kaylee. Thank you, everybody, for showing up tonight. You know, definitely appreciate everybody coming on out and, you know, virtually or in person, but the fact that you're taking this time. So we want to dive right on in and discuss this topic of PTSD and moral injury. So as Anna stated, yep, my name is Chaka McDonald. I'm the Veterans and Military Families Navigator for Oakland County with Oakland Community Health Network, part of a larger network of Walking with Warriors. Our program was created under the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. The title of it is Walking with Warriors, and there's a Veterans and Military Families Navigator that represents each county in the state of Michigan. And we're all hired within community behavioral health, all hired within PIHPs or CMHs, because that was one of the largest areas of need that the state identified as our veterans and military families need. They saw that was one of the largest need areas. So they created our Walking with Warrior program around roughly about 2017. I came on this role about 2018, but I've been working heavily with the veteran community for about 15 years, 15 to 16 years now. And I was raised by a Marine. My dad's a Marine, once a Marine, always a Marine. And two uncles served in Vietnam, sister-in-law, Iraq, Afghanistan veteran. So just military running through and through. I did not serve, but I was in law enforcement for a brief stint. So more of a paramilitary idea of military coming from a law enforcement background. So what I want to do is jump on in, as Anna stated. Yep, you can put questions in the chat and raise hands, things like that. But we're going to dive in and explore these topics because we want folks to be able to pull from what it is, what the conflict or the understanding of what moral injury is, because everyone's heard of PTSD. Before I do that, though, a little bit about OCHN. We are a community-based local public mental health system that manages specialty support and services to persons with serious mental illness, or SMI, serious emotional disturbances, SED, intellectual or developmental disabilities, infant mental health, and substance use disorders. Okay. So I work on our access team. So our access team is one of the our front doors to accessing behavioral health for Oakland County via OCHN through access. So that information, we can get that information to you as well, as far as contacting access and getting, talking with our referral specialists and getting screened, things like that. So once again, the topic is PTSD or moral injury. And yes, some items in this discussion can be triggering. So I just want to make sure everyone is aware of that, because we know that the basis of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or excuse me, now the new terminology is post-traumatic stress, not disorder, dropping the D, and moral injury. These things are coming to play in folks' lives because of something that could be traumatic. Okay, so that's where some of the topics will be a little troubling there, but we'll get through it. So just to dive right on in, post-traumatic stress disorder. Once again, the disorder is something that's being looked at as being dropped. Because if a person has experienced post-traumatic stress, that doesn't mean they have a disorder. That means that that's something that they're dealing with, they're working with. They're not, they don't need to be labeled. Okay. It's not something that's wrong with them. It's something that they've experienced that has triggered that fight or flight response in their mind. So post-traumatic stress is a psychiatric disorder that may occur in people who've experienced or witnessed a traumatic event. These events can be, but are not limited to natural disaster, a serious accident, a terrorist act, war, combat, or rape, or anyone that may have been threatened with death, sexual violence, or serious injury. We know right off the bat, yesterday at the parade at Kansas City, okay, you're going to have, you had influx of 1 million people out there, and regardless if the shooting took place next to them, all you saw were people ducking and moving and things like that. That was a cluster event that can trigger post-traumatic stress. Okay. And some of those folks may get impacted with moral injury, the folks who saw the victims that were wounded or got shot, or the one individual that was deceased. That that incident right there, all now you have individuals that may need to be seen or counseled for post-traumatic stress and or moral injury. Okay. So PTSD is brought on by traumatic events and is the result of the brain trying to shield itself from harm. So it's the mind that's trying to protect itself. When we were created, we pretty much, it's no different from our immune system, right? You get a cold, you actually get a fever, your temperature goes up because the body is trying to fight off that illness, right? Well, the brain actually has the same. It has this mechanism. Cortisol levels rise up, things like that, and it's trying to shield itself. It's trying to protect itself from what it perceives may be harm. All right. So PTSD can change your mood, your sleep patterns, risk-taking behaviors, hypervigilance, and result in angry outbursts. Some people experience nightmares, flashbacks, memories, and may have difficulty relaxing and sleeping. So when we talk about flashbacks and nightmares, folks may say, so like I said, I work in our military community, but like I said, I've been working with veterans for, it'd be close to 20 years in a little while here, right? And in military community. And there's no time frame for a person that was either in law enforcement, a veteran, served in the military, triage nurse, etc. That post-traumatic stress, that response to that trauma, it could be happening for years. So I was talking to a spouse of a Vietnam veteran who pulled me to the side, and mind you, her husband has been out of Nam. Nam's been over for over 50 years. Okay. Well, the last troop got out into 74, around 1974. So you're looking at close to 50 years. All right. When you look at the end of Vietnam, her husband was still having nightmares and night terrors. So, because the body doesn't forget. So he was over there because he never got counsel for what he experienced over in Vietnam. He was still having nightmares and things like that. PTSD or PTS. People may also experience guilt, shame, self-blame, or blaming of someone else. Another component of PTS. So also you'll see in moral injury how those two can overlap. I might experience guilt. Why didn't I do more? or I had to take this life, or I had to do this, or I witnessed this thing, what's wrong with me? All right. 67%, a third of 30 million veterans in the United States report PTSD. So when folks hear this kind of stuff here, they automatically think that that's a former military individual who was aiming bullets downrange. I call it downrange, right? Hollywood has romanticized military as saying that everyone that served the military, they're aiming a gun downrange and things like that. Whatever jobs we have in the civilian world, the military has it, right? So they have accounting. We have accounting. They have accounting. We have cooks. They have cooks. We have HR. They have H. So you get what I'm saying. But everyone in the military, there's 20.1 million vets. All right. So everyone in the military, though, did go through basic. Everyone in the military did go through the same type of basic training, right? But I don't have to have been an individual who was in direct combat to experience PTSD. So I have an individual that I've been working with that worked on helicopters in the Navy. So he worked on helicopters in the Navy, and there was a particular helicopter that he was working on where he had a buddy of his, an officer, but they were friends. And that person, something happened with that chopper, whatever happened on a particular mission, and that chopper went down and crashed. Okay. That individual was killed. And the gentleman that I was working with actually he had PTSD. He thought that that was his fault because he was the mechanic for that helicopter. All right. So just giving an example, not everything is bullets downrange, things like that. That's one subset, but PTSD can be brought on by various situations. We're going to look at a video here that's going to go into further detail about what PTSD is. I believe everybody can hear me as well. Hear the video rather. Okay, and so before we even go to that one, I saw someone put in the chat as far as MST. I don't know if you guys are familiar with MST, but MST is military sexual trauma. That's something that I have a complete separate training, a whole training on MST. Every veteran that I screen, and being in this role, I've worked with over 1,000 veterans and military families just since being in this role. I screen for military sexual trauma, and I've come across so many veterans that have experienced MST, but I've talked to so many that said, Chaka, you're one of the first that I've told this to, not necessarily going into the details. Some have, but announcing that I've experienced MST, and and it's almost like a weight off their shoulders because they've been diagnosed with PTSD, but for whatever reason, they may have been getting treatment, etc., but nobody did a deeper dive to ask about sexual trauma. The majority of individuals that are affected by sexual trauma in the military are men. Why? Because men make up the largest part of the military, but it's 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 looked at as being, well, that's what's happening to our female warriors. Now it's happening to both genders, and for whatever reason, it has not been explored as being an issue of, you're seeing a person that's a client and they're abusing substances, or they're having suicide ideation. They experience this and that, but you're not having individuals that do a deeper dive to screen for sexual trauma. If an individual has disclosed that they served in the military, ask, have you ever experienced any MST, any military sexual trauma? You'll be surprised on how many folk would have disclosed yes. This is one of the first times somebody asked me that. All right, so I'm just putting that out there as well. A person can get service connected with the VA if they experience MST. I won't go down that road there. Another thing that an individual stated, that the young lady stated in this video here, was the fear of crowds. That there, guys, I'm sure, I don't know if you guys are the brave ones that go out during Black Friday and all that kind of stuff but I remember I hit a particular mall, and you talk about wall to wall people. I don't suffer from PTS, but I definitely got an understanding where you couldn't really even move. So if I'm an individual that may have a fear of crowds, or something has happened when I was in a crowded area, and you asked me to go to the mall in a particular, holiday or whatever the situation is, and I may, if I've experienced a particular kind of trauma, I may tell you no. But the thing is, as she stated here, that doesn't make that person weird, odd, or difficult and all that. They've experienced a trauma that you didn't experience. So that's what I see as being the navigator, that is so important. Each person that you talk to, you treat them as an individual. And I know I may have a lot of clinical folk and things like that. And I know you can get to the point where I've seen this before. My mindset is, each individual that comes, that I get a chance to serve and talk to, I treat them as unique as their fingerprint. When I was in law enforcement, we fingerprinted. Everybody had a unique fingerprint. That was the way you got to get. That's how I look at everyone that I have an opportunity to talk to, and that's how you not get desensitized and things like that, and you're able to help that individual from where they're at and not judge them. So let's look at this. So who experiences PTSD? So it can occur in all people of all ethnicities, nationalities, or cultures, and at any age. PTSD affects approximately 3.5% of U.S. adults every year, and an estimated 1 in 11 will be diagnosed with PTSD in their lifetime. I mentioned the shooting yesterday at Kansas City. Folks didn't expect that, but all you saw images of people being hunkered down and things like that. There you go, unfortunately. Women are twice as likely as men to have PTSD due to the higher incidence of sexual assault. 3 ethnic groups in the U.S. that have a higher propensity of facing PTSD: Latinos, African Americans, and Native Americans, are disproportionately affected and have higher rates of PTSD than non-Latino whites. This is in part due to socioeconomic factors that may hinder their resources to cope with traumatic stressors. that's a whole nother topic in and of itself. But your neighborhood, your zip code, things that you may hear. I was raised in a large city. I was raised around things that and experiences that maybe someone who lived in the burbs and all that didn't quite experience. So I had different coping mechanisms or things I had to deal with, but I didn't know that that may have been not functional for a young man to have to deal with until I got out of that environment and saw like, oh, maybe this isn't right. Okay. Like I said, I'm not going to do a deep dive into that, but you can kind of see where it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't have to just be military. It can be individuals based on where you live and what you're exposed to. Okay. You can start developing a hyper arousal and things like that. That's very real, very real. Uh, People with PTSD have intense, disturbing thoughts and feelings related to their experience that last long after the traumatic event has ended. So they may relive the event through flashbacks or nightmares. They may feel sadness or fear or anger. They can feel detached or estranged from other people. They may avoid situations. I mentioned the crowded mall. My awareness started being like going through the roof. I'm like, wow, like this is a whole lot of folks here. Thank God nothing happened, but um, they may avoid, like I said, situations or people that remind them of the traumatic event. They may have strong negative reactions to something as ordinary as a loud noise or accidental touch. That's why you'll hear around the 4th of July, you'll hear folks and you'll see maybe signage that says, watch the fireworks. Because once again, the mind is very powerful. It doesn't know. It doesn't know well, that's just a cherry bomb or whatever, or M80 and all that. If I have trauma that I have not been taught how to deal with and cope with, I could be triggered. But once again, that doesn't make me weird. That doesn't make me difficult or odd or, unfortunately, these negative stigmas that are attached to individuals that may have experienced some form of trauma. And I'll give you a quick story. Like I said, in my years of working with veterans and reentry and law enforcement and human services, I got tons of stories. So I was speaking to an individual who he was a young Marine, went into the Marine Corps. If any of you guys know Marines, they're a very unique bunch, and I say that jokingly. My dad's a Marine, all right, so Semper Fi to the day he died type of deal, right? My peer support, my right hand man, Isaac, 23 years in Marine Corps. So I got an affinity and love for Marines. All right, nothing against other branches, but so this young man reached out to me, and he stated that he didn't feel the same since he got out of the Corps. Went into the Corps right after high school, and came and the issue was not the fact that he went to the Corps and he got out after his 4 years. He said, "Mr. McDonald, I don't feel like I fit anymore. I can't keep a girlfriend. I'm having issues with this and that." And I said, okay. And he's like, I said, well, what's going on with the alcohol? And he's drinking almost close to like a fifth a day. He was hitting the bottle pretty hard. So for me, I'm like, we have to address the trauma, the things that are making you feel like you got to pick up the bottle because the liver can only take so much, right? So he said, I feel different. And the first thing I told him was, you are different. Now, when we say that word different nowadays, it has this negative stigma. But this gentleman at 18, 17, 18 years old went into the United States Marine Corps, a branch that historically is looked at as being one of the toughest, arduous type of deal. And who he became as a man and his life experiences was formed and shaped through the lens of the United States Marine. No different from the Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, okay? So how could he not be different? All right, that was the one thing. And that brought him down. I said, sir, you are different. While your friends were playing Call of Duty, you lived it. All right, just throwing it out there like that. And what it was bringing him down, taking the stigma off of any trauma. And I believe he had a deployment, of course, while his time in the Corps. And I'm like, sir, everything is going to be fine. He's like, well, I'm sleeping next to my shotgun. I said, well, we got to stop that. He said, I can't keep a roommate because I keep sleeping next to my weapon. I said, well, I wouldn't live with you either, man. That kind of deal. So we kind of joked about that. Like, you can't drink and you can't, sleeping next to your weapon. But the main thing was my goal was to get him the help and not make him feel like he was some kind of oddity because he experienced life that 80 to 85% of Americans are not joining the military. So he did what 80% of folks are not doing, right? And then once again, who he was as a man was shaped through the lens of military. Okay, so I'm just kind of demystifying some of this so we can get more of that understanding, because I'm sure you guys are working with individuals who may have PTS or moral injury. So some symptomologies are intrusive thoughts such as repeated involuntary memories, distressing dreams or flashbacks of the traumatic event. And a quick side note, we did get him plugged into one of our core providers to get him help for the mental health situation he was going through, just for him to stop drinking. Okay. Also, avoiding reminders of the traumatic event may include avoiding people, places, activity, objects, and situations that may trigger distressing memories. So if you got a loved one or a friend or family that says, I don't want to go to the fireworks, say downtown Detroit, I don't want to go here and that. Okay, let's go where you may want to go. That's fine. That's fine. That's just love. That's just, I care about you. You're not some oddity. Let's go where you feel comfortable, and that's going to help that person get the treatment or therapy, because they're seeming like, you know, somebody cares and understands. So some additional symptomologies will be alterations in cognition and mood, the inability to remember important aspects of a traumatic event, or negative thoughts, feelings leading to ongoing distorted beliefs about yourself. You know, I'm bad, or no one can be trusted. You might hear former folks that served in the military may have that. I was in law enforcement, so big time saw it in law enforcement. Not saying that just comes with wearing the badge, but as law enforcement, you are more likely to be in harm's way than individuals served in the military. I remember while I was even in the academy, they taught us not to even call a traffic stop as being a routine traffic stop. They intentionally, I would hate to say, beat that into our mind. They didn't physically do it, but because if as a police officer, if I looked at, I'm just pulling this guy over for out of date tags, my guard might be down. Well, you actually have more officer involved shootings and homicide in traffic stops. All right, and domestics, I would say domestics and traffic stops kind of round those up there. So that's something unfortunate that can happen when you're working in a institution protecting and serving. You're seeing some of the worst of folks. You may feel also, wrongly blaming yourself or others, ongoing fear, horror, anger, guilt, shame, much less interest in activities as previously enjoyed. You may feel detached or estranged from others, unable to experience positive emotion, void of happiness, satisfaction. The divorce rate in military is 70 to 75%. For me, that is out of this world. And I want to say military now is doing a little bit better job of helping these men and women when they come back, say from a deployment. Say an individual, the average deployment for an individual could be 9 months, 10 months, depending on the branch, right? That person is removed from that family for 9 to 10, 11, or 12 months. That other family member is going to be home raising the kids and is going about daily life or however that looks. Then that other person is reinserted back into the family and may not know, well, how do I fit? They may not even feel of use anymore. Well, this person is getting along so great without me. Do they even need me? Or the traumas that I experienced while I was over in country or whatever, I don't feel safe to talk to anybody about that, right? So then you have breakdowns in marriage and things like that. So I want to say I think the military is doing a bit better job now. But if you guys have any marriage-based treatment and ministries, things like that, include our service members and our law enforcement, our EMTs, our firefighters, things like that, because they may not be wanting to share those things with the spouses, but the spouse may be getting the bad end of it, where that person may be reacting negatively or not speaking to them. So alterations in arousal, reactivity. So arousal and reactive symptoms may include being irritable, having angry outbursts, or behaving recklessly. or in a self-destructive way. So being overly watchful of one's surroundings in a suspecting way, being easily startled, or having problems concentrating or sleeping. Once again, symptomologies of PTSD. So a diagnosis of PTSD requires exposure to an upsetting or traumatic event. However, the exposure could be indirect rather than firsthand. So it can be an indirect exposure to something rather than firsthand. So it has me think about your ER, right? So your trauma nurses or trauma doctors, things like that. Your EMTs, definitely our service members. So social workers, right? Um, I'm thinking here, the first responders that came on the scene, that horrible the shooting in Oxford. I'm thinking about the deputy that tried to assist one of the children and putting him in a squad car and taking him to the hospital. When I heard that, um, that's PTSD, and that can also be moral injury. We're going to go into as well. Um, so it can, excuse me, occur in an individual learning about the violent death of a close family member or friend. It can occur as a result of repeated exposure to horrible details of trauma, such as police officers exposed to details of child abuse cases. For all the social workers on here and clinicians that hear a bevy of different things that can be very negative, okay, you have to have something in place that's protecting you. And when I say that, you have to have, when I first started this job at OCHN, that's the first time I ever heard of self-care. I didn't know what in the world that was. But our agency stressed self-care. And I think even now we have like an hour at 12 where you're not supposed to have meetings and things like that. You're supposed to like shut things down. It makes sense now, right? So all my social workers, folks, you're hearing that secondary trauma. Well, we're going to get into secondary trauma in just a minute, but you're hearing these traumas, you have to have things that in place to help protect yourself. Is it prayer? Is it exercise? Is it, some folks meditate? Mine is prayer and exercise. Okay. That's how I got to let all this stuff go. I like to work with thousands of folks. You got to figure out a way. Repeated trauma is called CPTSD. So compound PTSD. So CPTSD is when a person experiences continual waves of fear and pain and terror. This can affect first responders, children, uh, domestic violence survivors, healthcare workers, veterans, those that are impoverished, the homeless. It can lead to dissociative amnesia, particularly brought on by repeated trauma. So look at that list there. Children. I'm so happy we do the ACEs study here at OCHN. And you guys, I'm sure, have heard of ACEs and what you're doing. But adverse childhood experiences. I remember speaking to an individual that was special forces, and he was having some behavioral health challenges, and great guy. We got to talking, as I do with all of the hundreds of individuals I've worked with that kind of deal, and started asking him about his trauma, and even said while he was in the Navy, someone tried to sexually assault him, and he dealt with that individual in the way that he felt, okay, in a violent manner from what he stated there. But then I also asked him about any kind of additional trauma, things like that. He had trauma from when he was 12 years old, that he had a family member that was sexually abusing him while he was a child, but he never talked to anybody about that. Never. And then you go into military, and then you're experiencing, like I said, he was special forces, so he's kicking in the door. He's doing, some things over, maybe above what our infantry and you get what I'm saying, the night timers, things like that some of our special forces guys do. So not putting down any, what other what our our Marines and our soldier sailors do, but special forces kind of do a little bit more as well. But nobody ever talked to him about his childhood trauma. And I said, no, man, we got to get you when you talk to someone, we get you plugged in. I need you to bring up the childhood trauma as well, so you can close the door completely to what's going on inside. Okay, we can do it. We can just try to deal with the whole person, not just from where you're at. Secondary trauma. So a form of trauma that a person experiences not due to something that's happened to them directly, but rather due to some indirect connection, secondhand to a traumatic experience. So very important, once again, for our individuals that are case managers, caseworkers, social workers, secondary trauma is very real. Vicarious trauma, process of change resulting from empathetic engagement with the trauma survivor, right? So anyone who engages empathetically with survivors of traumatic incidents, torture, and material relating to their trauma is potentially affected, including doctors and other healthcare professionals. All right. So counselors, social workers, etc. So you guys may have heard of secondary trauma before. Vicarious, it is very real. And I can say in the multitude of folks that I've worked with that I've experienced that, I would say secondary vicarious, say one time. And that kind of startled me from what this individual was telling me, what he experienced. And but that's very real. So you got to make sure you check yourself and you know when to shut things off, or maybe if you have to pass something along, you know what, I need to take a break real quick because I'm something's kind of triggering me right now, right? So people working in volunteering in fields of victim services, um, social workers, as I mentioned, case managers, law enforcement, EMT, fire services, once again, children between the ages of 0 and 5, super important that basically, as I was stating, that you're taking a look at how is this affecting you? Protecting our children. Protecting our children. I would just say protecting our children. Protecting our children. Everyone and anyone just can't be around your child. And I'm saying that from the experience of being a dad. One of the best things that ever happened to me is being a father, right? And I had to be hyper vigilant about who my children were being exposed to and where and what they were being exposed to. So I didn't just look at it, that's family or that's a friend or whatever. No, that's my child, because my child, it's so important that you take care of the child or monitor the child, because they might not have, of course, the normal, the average child's not going to be able to have the vernacular that you're going to have as an adult, right? So they may not know to say this or say that, or something made them feel strange and that kind of deal. Thank God you got agencies like Care House that do talking about safe talks and things like that with children. And I'm just going to say, as a parent, and if you got young ones, be hyper vigilant. I didn't say be paranoid or fearful, but be hyper vigilant. Okay, you can save a lot of grief with your child that way as well. Healthcare workers. So during COVID, healthcare workers faced wartime conditions. In New York, the streets were lined with refrigerated trucks for the deceased. What did that do to the individual walking down the street? That you're seeing refrigerated trucks with deceased individuals inside that truck, right? Many were getting infected due to shortage of PPE, infecting about 450,000 individuals. Many of these individuals worked extremely long hours and were isolated from family and friends. I think about our nurses and healthcare. I remember the image of a nurse where she wore her mask so much it was just like tattooed on her face, but she didn't have it on, and you could see the exhaustion. That's secondary. That's vicarious trauma right there. Many were laid off, wondering about employment. We know that whole that debacle happened after folks, during the time of COVID and toward the end of it and things like that. Folks felt betrayed. So many healthcare workers develop PTSD as a result of the battle with the pandemic. So once again, PTSD is not just isolated to folks that were, military or folks that are law enforcement. Our first responders, our nurses, our doctors, our social workers. So additional risk factors to vicarious trauma. So anyone working with survivors of trauma and violence is at risk of being negatively impacted by the varied effects of vicarious trauma. So factors that may make employees or volunteers more vulnerable to this occupational risk include prior traumatic experiences. I remember when I was interviewing law enforcement, I had or, you take a litany of, oh my goodness, I had all kind of questions thrown toward me, right? And I remember I had to see someone that review my answers to my question. It's part of the background check, right? So also social isolation, both on and off the job, a tendency to avoid feelings. This person may already be a person that avoids feelings. You got to watch out and make sure they share. They may have a tendency to withdraw or assign blame to others in stressful situations. They may have difficulty expressing feelings. That's one thing that I teach, and I teach parents, and I teach anyone that's worked the misnomer that if you're a man, you're not supposed to express feeling or you can't, show emotion and things like that. Unfortunately, that's been a negative thing that's been passed down. That's the last thing you even want to tell your child, that they should not be able to express emotion. If I'm upset, I'm upset. So what you end up having is wounded boys that become wounded men, as the multiple men that I work with that have things that they've been dealing with since they were children. And they break down in tears because they actually find a safe space finally to let this go. It shouldn't have took when he was till he was 35 or 40 to, and I'm not blaming that individual, but we got to switch some things up. I think in the behavioral health world, and number one, let go of that misnomer that men have to, be tough and all this kind of stuff. No, whatever. So some additional risk factors could be a lack of preparation, orientation, training, and supervision in their job. Being a newer employee and less experienced at their job. These are risk factors once again. Constant and intense exposure to trauma with little or no variation in work tasks. So if you're an individual and you're the manager or you're the supervisor, check in with your staff. How you doing? How you doing? They feed us good OCHN, so I like that. We get the email say, hey, we got some food now. But that's psychologically, that's helping folks out. That's giving me a break. I could detach right quick and go eat a bagel. I'm not telling you to go eat a bunch of bagel, but you get what I'm saying there, right? Letting folks, we have a gym. I don't want to say downstairs at the in the Troy location. So you want to burn off some steam, right? But the main thing is getting that individual, getting them out for a sec, and just checking in. That's the main thing here. A lack of an effective or supportive process for discussing traumatic content of the work. So does that individual have a process where they can actually come and talk to you about what's going on in their duty? So traumatic stress, also traumatic stress that can result from indirect exposure to fatal or life-threatening national events, mass shootings, natural disasters, various violent televised acts, another type of violent act, disturbing events that dominate the headlines. Some of you guys may be as old as me, as you remember the TV used to, remember the national anthem would play at about 1 o'clock in the morning or something like that, and and they might have the jets going across. Now with cable, you have a 24-hour news cycle, right? You have to be super, super, super careful about what are you watching, because that can be vicarious trauma for you. If you're always catching the news and you're seeing all the violence that they have no problem showing us, you can start being affected by that. That is secondary trauma, can be vicarious trauma as well. All right, so you got to definitely watch that. The ongoing pandemic was a catalyzing both firsthand and secondhand and PTSD in teens. Studies show that close to 1 in 3 teens experience PTSD symptoms as a result of the pandemic and its associated trauma. So thanks to Twitter, as you see here, thanks to Twitter, Snapchat, and the 24-hour news channel, it's possible for youth and their parents who are far removed from an incident to feel like they're experiencing the trauma firsthand. Okay? So we have to watch that. Be aware, but at the same time, you got to watch that. Teen mental health during the pandemic. So, I won't run through all these here, but 44% felt sad or hopeless during the past 12 months. That was during the pandemic. 37% reported poor mental health most of the time or always. 20% seriously considered attempting suicide during the past 12 months. 66% had difficulty completing schoolwork, and 55% experienced emotional abuse by an adult at the home. 29% reported a parent or other adult in their home, lost a job. So you see the rest of these here. 24% experienced hunger. So during the pandemic, it was wow. it affected multi facets of individuals there, from children to parents to, pretty much the whole world. The challenges of PTSD are enormous. So 38% of soldiers report psychological symptoms. Psychological concerns are significantly higher among those who repeated deployments. Well, we know why. Because that cortisol, that fight or flight, never goes down. So what you'll have is individuals. I was at an event today. Talked to a combat Marine. He's a gunnery sergeant Marine Corps. You could, when you're a gunny, that's a whole different thing, right? He had 8 deployments. 3 or 4, he said, were combat deployments, but he had 8 in his time in the Corps. How you deal with that? When did you ever come down from the last traumatic event that you just experienced, right? And he did say he's plugged in with the VA. He is service connected for PTSD. So, but repeated deployments. 46% of veterans use alcohol to deal with PTSD. Big reason behind that. I don't get a diagnosis if I go and get a drink. Because one of the first things that veterans tell me, that if they go to a behavioral health professional, first thing, I'm going to be diagnosed and I'm going to be written multiple scripts. Well, letting everybody know, folks, that they don't like taking the medication. So a lot of folks will self-medicate through alcohol. I'm not validating it and saying that that's the best way to cope, but you're quick to diagnose me, but I've had trauma. I just need somebody to talk to and let me know that what I experienced was dysfunctional, but I'm not. So because you just want to, maybe write me a script, I'll just go ahead and go to the store. The other thing is this too, alcohol is big in the military. I'll harp on the Marines, but the Marines will say, hey, we were created in a bar in 17, I want to say it was 1770. I don't want to mess it up, make the Marines mad. But alcohol is part of a culture. All right. Yes, it is very much glorified in the military. And I'll give you another quick story that I'm in the jails a lot. And I remember seeing a gentleman that we're in a particular unit in the jail. He was a Marine. He was in there for his 3rd DUI. And I want to say in Michigan, that's that felony level if you're looking at state time. And I asked him, I said, man, asked him a dumb question. So did you drink while you're in the Corps? And his face just lit up, right? Like, yeah, he's smiling ear to ear. And I can almost assume that a deputy was kind of standing over us, kind of an elevated area, looking down like, wow, dude, but he's in it for his 3rd DUI, but that was part of the culture in the Corps. Okay. Moral injury. Now we're going to look at moral injury. Moral injury can also resemble PTSD, but requires an additional treatment modality. So now we're going to look at this video here, and we're going to see how moral injury may have set in with this individual. Okay. I do want to mind you that this particular video, it can be triggering. So I'm just giving you a heads up if you want to mute or anything like that at this point. within 5 months, he said he killed 4 people. The pain in his eyes, 29 years old, in charge of 45 people, and he can, only job he can get, pretty much stocking shelves type of deal, and work security. To know that his friend's mom took her life, killed herself. So how do you process that? How do you process that? And that's what I think gets lost when we speak to our service members. And I told a serviceman, I was at a training, the reason why we're able to go to the Imagine Theater and go to the mall and all that is because of individuals like him, because of the stuff that they've done, they're doing, protecting our borders. But I come home and I can't even get a decent job, even though you supervise 29 people. You were a supervisor. And at that level of 29 to 35 to 40 people, you're actually a director at that level, but you can't get a decent job, right? And I'm supposed to cope with the fact that I was serving my country and exposed to death or had to take life. And I'm supposed to just, suck it up, buttercup, here, go get a job, have a nice day. No. So now we're going to look at, and let alone them kicking in doors. When I was in law enforcement, they trained you knew, clearing a house, clearing a room, that kind of deal, right? But when you take that aspect to our military for the past 20 years, having to do a law enforcement component, you don't know what's behind that corner, that kind of deal. That's a whole nother type of awareness that a lot of folks just don't understand, right? So now let's look at moral injury. But when I see that video, it angers me on the behalf of our former military. Because so much more needs to be done. It should not be that hard to get services. It should not be that hard to actually get someone to talk to me and give me counsel and treatment and therapy. The first thing you want to do is write me a script. That script is not doing anything for the individual that he stated his buddy Argon got blown up, but he remembers the raindrops. How is that medication helping me forget that the same day that we found out that he had a roadside bomb, that it started raining? And that's why we're looking at moral injury. So it's a separate diagnosis from PTSD and may require a different treatment modality. It can occur when someone does or witnesses something that contradicts their moral beliefs. It can be an act of omission, betrayal of leadership, others in power, or peers. Moral injury is the distressing psychological and behavioral, social, and sometimes spiritual aftermath of exposure to such events. Exposure to traumatic events. So a person can have moral injury and PTSD and not meet the criteria for PTSD. So one of the main things is here that so many things have been labeled as PTSD really has been moral injury. So many things that have been labeled PTSD has been labeled incorrectly. It's really been moral injury because it's the wounding of the soul. That person feels like, am I a good person because I had to take a life in defense of my country, or I saw death. I was an ER nurse and that person died while I was. Did I do enough? That's moral injury. That's not PTSD, but they can overlap. We'll go into that. So it can occur when people perpetrate or fail to prevent or witness events that contradict deeply held moral beliefs and expectations. An active commission, an active omission, guilt, shame, disgust, impacts a person's spirituality. How can I still have a relationship with my higher power given what I've experienced, seen, done, failed to prevent? So I was talking to a veteran one day who was in a, I want to say more of a recon type of outfit in Iraq, Army vet, but he was in, I would say more of a recon type of deal, small unit, 3 to 4 man, and they were trying to pretty much scout out a location to make sure it was going to be safe for the other troops to come on in. So typically in that type of deal, you're not going to have a band of guys. You're not trying to make noise. When they came across what they would consider enemy combatant, they had to kill that individual. He was right in the space where they were at. They killed that individual, okay, quietly, but they couldn't do anything with his body. All right. And once again, I told you, I'm sorry if some of the things I'm saying may be disturbing to you, but so they killed him quietly. but they had to leave his body in the corner for a few days. And so he asked me, so I'm talking to him and things like that. He was already being treated for PTSD at the VA, all right, on a cocktail of medications. But he asked me, he said, Chaka, do you think I was a bad person? I said, well, while the body was there, did you guys cover him with anything? He said, man, we weren't going to waste our ponchos or anything on that guy. He said, do you think I was a bad person for that? I said, no, I don't think you were a bad person, man. You know, we just need to get you help. While he was talking to me, the moral injury, the fact that he was still morally wounded was just coming out. So what I do in my role in our Navigator, I called down to the VA, spoke to the individual I needed to speak to, and said, I need you guys to add moral injury, treatment for moral injury in his diet and in his treatment plan. Not just PTSD because it's not working, add moral injury. All right. Like I said, these guys and girls see stuff that Hollywood makes movies about. So I'm not a big fan of Hollywood, as you can see, because it romanticizes some of the most wicked things that people have experienced. So moral injury refers to the psychological, social, spiritual impact of events involving betrayal or transgression of one's deeply held moral beliefs and values. This can occur in high stakes situations. So moral injury is not a recognized mental health disorder in and of itself, but may be associated with PTSD or depression. It's not recognized because you can't medicate it. That's why it was PTSD was the one that you can deal with that frontal cortex and things like that. You know, you can do things to try to bring that hyperness down, so to speak. But moral injury is more of my core fabric. I was raised, thou shalt not kill, but I had to kill this individual or morally wound him to protect my nation. Does God still love me? That's moral injury. Well, you get what I'm saying with that? So moral injury is not burnout, but if it's not checked, it can lead to burnout. So moral injury can lead to cynicism, depersonalization, and disengagement. This can be prevalent in human service workers, case managers, social workers, first responders, clinicians, doctors, etc. The VA does now. One of the first studies was with the VA, not the VA down, not the Detroit VA, but one of the VAs out west. I did speak to the top psych down at the Detroit VA, and we were talking about moral injury a few years ago, that kind of deal. So they are trying to include that more into the psychiatric treatment, but it's still, I don't think, getting the exposure that it needs along with PTSD. So the concept of moral injury dates back to the work of a military psychiatrist who described the syndrome in Vietnam War veterans. So the introduction of moral injury actually dates back to Euripides in 416 BC. So way back then, they had an idea of moral injury. He called it miasma, signifying the moral defilement or pollution, often resulting from unjust killing, but applicable to any transgression of moral values, whether applied to the perpetrator, victim, or even the observer. So this is way back then as well. Moral injury is a deep sense of transgression, including feelings of shame, grief, meaninglessness, and remorse from having violated a core or moral beliefs. Moral injury also typically is an impact on the individual's spirituality. An individual with moral injury may have difficulty understanding how does their belief in my relationship, how does God still love me, but I had to do this or that? Okay. How can our relationship be true given the horrific thing that I experienced, leading to the uncertainty about previously held spiritual beliefs? All right. So that's why it's super important that if we're going to look at treating individuals holistically, we can't isolate their faith. We can't isolate what they may have been brought up in. So that's why it's super important. And I know our agency is partnering with our faith community, and I definitely in the military we partner with our faith community. I have a meeting tomorrow with a local church, but you can't just say we're just going to medicate, but I'm not going to treat your spirit and help bring you back to what you may have grown up with. That's helping you keep together. So police, paramedics, emergency medical technicians, these are at increased risk of moral injury because their repeated exposure to violence, trauma, and severe injuries as a part of their daily work. So there are times when decisions must be made or errors in judgment that can lead to loss of life, over which there is much remorse. So it can occur in community members that experience violence or trauma, sexual assault or car accidents. Think about, our folks that work at Haven, our folks that work at, our Common Ground, folks that maybe that first line, okay? Of course, with our service members and EMTs. So more injury can occur among healthcare workers. So it may occur if they have to make a difficult decision related to life or death, or resource allocation. If they were trying to save that person's life, couldn't do so. In the time of a healthcare crisis, healthcare workers may witness what they perceive to be unjustifiable or unfair acts or policies that may lead to a sense of betrayal. Once again, moral injury. This is going to be a brief video here that's going to do a further detail on the moral injury as well. So we're going to look at some of the overlapping, but as the gentleman stated, he had never heard of it before, because it's something, once again, that deals with the person's spirit or soul, or it's not fear-based, as she was stating. It's not based in fear. It's more of that core. So it's possible to have moral injury and not meet the criteria for PTSD. They can lead to different symptom profiles than distress from traumatic events that elicit a fear-based reaction. So PTSD is diagnosed when a severe traumatic stress is present, exposure to death, threatened death, actual or threatened serious injury, actual, or threatened sexual violence. And as you see there, adversely functioning in daily life, intrusive nightmares and flashbacks, things like that. So you can see how those, because moral injury can have you can have moral injury because you were exposed to death or threatened death, or you saw that, or you witnessed it. Okay. In contrast, so that's where it's in contrast, moral injury develops when transgressions of a moral belief or value are committed, observed, or learned about. Um, with consequent feelings of guilt and shame, feelings of betrayal, moral concerns, difficulty forgiving, loss of meaning, loss of trust, a loss of religious faith, the result of those moral transgressions. You had a lot of friendly fire situations with with our Vietnam veterans. All right, a lot of friendly fire. How come my own country, fire on me? That type of deal. Why am I called baby killer when I get off the plane, even though they drafted me? You get what I'm saying? So many different MST. I've talked to so many victims of MST where it was a higher up that sexually assaulted them. This individual, I was supposed to put my trust in, but they were the ones that took advantage of me sexually. Moral injury in veterans and active duty military has been associated with numerous adverse mental health outcomes, severe PTSD, depression, anxiety, increased suicide. Even after addressing PTSD symptomologies, the presence of MI, moral injury, remains a significant risk for depression, anxiety, and suicide. So veterans who utilize negative forms of religious coping may be particular risk for suicide. So the other thing with that is there was a veteran I was working with that he was being treated for PTSD. He was getting his treatment at the VA for his PTSD and treatment and all that, but he still said, "I'm still feeling suicidal." So I raised the issue to our group. I raised the issue to my the group, part of the group that he was with, that he needs to get also treatment for moral injury. He had 1 or 2 deployments to Iraq, and we need to add moral injury to his treatment plan, not just PTSD. So if you look at this diagram here, you see how moral injury and PTSD are overlapping. So you have the guilt, you have the shame, you have the intrusion, the avoidance, things like that, loss of trust. So moral injury just not in the DSM, but it's a very real thing, and it does have its own treatment modalities as well. Okay. People are a 3-part being. So we have a body. We got a body. Everybody sitting here got a body, or you can't sit here, right? We have a soul, our conscious mind, our subconscious, and things like that, where we think, we rationalize things like that. But we have a spirit, and that's where folks, unfortunately, I would say, from a mental health and substance use perspective, behavioral health, everything's been treating the body and the soul or the mind. But what about that person's upbringing? What about, as you see where it says spirit, do they have a purpose? Do they feel they have a purpose? Do they feel they are loved? Do they feel they're worthy of love? Do they feel their life has a meaning? But does my life, if I don't feel like I have a meaning in my life, then why do I feel I even should be here? So yes, I'll act out recklessly, things like that, because I don't feel my life even has meaning. I feel like I don't even have purpose. As you heard the gentleman who was in our video, who was in active duty, you saw in his eyes purpose. What is my I can't even get a good job, etc. I need to go back to high risk security, putting himself back in harm's way. Do I even feel, am I loving for what I had to do or saw done? So that's why I said we got to treat the whole person. Yes, you get the counseling, but yes, we involve the faith community. Yes, we look at exercise. We look at the a holistic view of treating individuals. So treatment for PTSD. Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's the thing too. And I love that you said that. Don't put a timestamp on somebody's trauma. You can't, that's why you had so many Vietnam veterans when they came home from Nam. I'm using that example because many guys from Nam came home, started working at the big three, started having families, and they stuck their trauma. But once they became, and I talked to so many Vietnam, I told you I've worked with thousands of folks over my years, right? And just over 1,000 just being in this role as navigator for going on 6 years. Um, I've had veterans that state that once I became an empty nester, the thoughts came back, the nightmares, things like that came back. So don't tell a person that, oh, you shouldn't have gotten over this by now. You were assaulted as a child. Now you're 40. It's no. If I never had anybody walk through this with me and get me, it don't matter. I'm 40 and it happened when I was 5. You get what I'm saying? So different treatment for this though. CPT is huge. Focus on modifying painful negative emotions such as shame and guilt. It addresses the beliefs that I have failed, the world is dangerous. PET, prolonged exposure therapy. Some of you guys may already be doing this or already familiar, but it uses repeated, detailed imagining of the trauma or progressive exposure of symptom triggers in a safe, controlled way to help that person face and actually gain control of that fear and learn how to cope. So they have different virtual reality programs that have been used to help war veteran PTSD re-experience the battlefield in a controlled therapeutic way. Stress inoculation therapy aims to arm the individual with the necessary coping skills to successfully defend against stressful triggers, all right, through their exposure of milder levels of stress. Group therapy encourages survivors of similar traumatic events to share their experiences and reactions in a comfortable, non-judgmental setting. That's the key part, non-judgmental. Group members help one another realize that many people would have responded the same way and felt the same emotions. Family therapy can also help. Spiritually integrated CPT, so SICPT, is spiritually and religiously integrated treatment for moral injury in the setting of PTSD. So SICPT uses the patient's spiritual and religious beliefs to process traumatic events and dysfunctional cognition. Okay? Religiously integrated cognitive behavioral therapy. Everybody heard of CBT, which is awesome, but now they have religiously integrated CBT. So although our CBT does not specifically address moral injury or PTSD, it does focus on depression, which is often comorbid with MI. So what they're pretty much saying, those two a lot of times can be linked together. Okay. Self-care. I mentioned that earlier. It's very important that we have a daily form of self-care. All right, I mentioned when I started working here, that's when I first started hearing about that term before. I didn't know what that was. Just thought you just dealt with stuff, just dealt with it. Prayer, examples of self-care are prayer, practicing gratitude, just being thankful. I was at an event today, and I'm literally have about 300 vets come out to this place today of all eras, and just a smile, just guys saying, "Hey man, how you doing today?" "Hey man, I'm above ground, I'm good." Just that form of thankfulness, right? Spending time with non-toxic people, that's huge. If you're a person suffering from depression or PTSD or even low self-esteem, not being around toxic folk. But unfortunately, if I have not gotten the right treatment or therapy for my moral injury or PTSD, I might gravitate to toxic people. So that's why it's important that this gets identified. Unplugging from technology. Is my phone here? Put it down. All right. When Michigan actually gets nice again, I can say one of the nicer times I went out for a jog, came back home, sat on my porch, and I just at this time we had these wind chimes, and just hearing the wind blow through the chimes, one of the most relaxing things that I've ever experienced. Just sitting there and listening to the wind just blow with no technology, right? Exercise, run, walk the dog. I put burpees in there. I like those. Folks are like, what? Movement of some sort. You cannot be, they said sitting was the new smoking. You got to get out. You got to move. I didn't say run a marathon, but go walk. During COVID, I remember my family, when all the gyms and everything was shut down, it was cold and I don't know what. We still got out and walked, but that was a form of therapy for us, right? Eating healthy, that is super huge, okay? Cutting down on sweets and high carb foods. Oh wow, if I could say how that regulates the mind, sugar and things like that. Proper sleep, huge. All right. So you see, I'm naming stuff right here that it's nothing to do with medication. All right. It's nothing to do with medication. Some of this stuff folks can even prescribe to others or do themselves while they're on this call. That, hey man, my whole mood has changed now. That kind of deal. All right. I'll leave this back up here real quick. And I know we want to do some question and answer. Had a lot of slides, so I want to make sure I got through that stuff, but I want to leave that up there real quick. Unplug your phone, go walk, do the burpees. All right, you gotta do those burpees. No, but eat the broccoli, eat eat stuff like that. All right, but I do want to open up now for any questions and answer questions that folks may have, or any comments or things like that.
If you have any questions or comments, oh, there's one hand raised. Joseph, you can unmute yourself.
Sir, fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. As both a veteran and a retired law enforcement officer, fantastic presentation. I really appreciated it. One of the things that you really harped on that I can't give it enough attention is the protective factors, that especially that you listed at the end, as much as simple as something as a good night's sleep versus or in conjunction with a healthy lifestyle, or any of those what sometimes we take for granted as simple things, are protective factors that can mitigate or bump up against such things as self-harm or harm to others. So I mean, I really give you a lot of credit for really propagating those and lifting them up and putting the importance behind that stuff. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your service on both ends, and definitely thank you for pointing those things out, those basics. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Anyone else with any other questions or comments, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat. Or at this point, if you'd like to take yourself off mute to just ask, you may do so. We'll hold off for another minute just to make sure anyone has anything. We are seeing, Chaka, you've seen there in the chat, we are seeing everyone saying great presentation and very informative.
Thank you. Once again, I thank you guys for appreciate it. And I said thank you guys for spending your Thursday night going through, like, this could be a very tough topic. But I appreciate you guys taking the time out, and now of course knowledge is power. So you guys are now take this into your practices or just in your family members, whomever, and how if this is able to help, hey, that's a blessing. I'm happy. Definitely, thank you. But definitely appreciate you guys.
Yes, Phyllis, go ahead.
I have one question. In terms of the impact on when you're working with somebody who's been traumatized and who's been horrible things have been done to them, how do you handle your feeling of wanting to get revenge against this person who's violated your patient so badly?
Ma'am, that is an awesome question. Me being a person of prayer, I give it to God, and I know everybody on here has had somebody that betrayed them, did something, that kind of deal. That's my way, right? That's the way so I don't let this stuff build up, raise my blood pressure up, my blood sugar, and all these different things that can happen. I give it over, Lord, you handle this. I can't, and then I get a peace, and I can go about. That's my way I handle it. So I appreciate that question.
Daniela? I do notice, guys, we are a little past time, but if you want to stay and ask questions, we are here for that. I did put the evaluation in the chat, but we are here as long as Chaka is still available to answer those questions that everybody has. So I saw Daniela, and then we have another hand after that.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I have a question. I'm working with a particular veteran she is a female who been sexually assaulted. You briefly touch upon that. Are there any resources available or any way she can have some additional support in that matter?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Is she working with the VA? Do you know, Ann Arbor or Detroit?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Well, regardless if she's not working with the VAs or not, the VA does have specific counselors for MST. And that I do refer my veterans, who male and females, to these individuals for that specific counseling. So I can I guess put my email in the chat, or Anna, if you're able to put my email in the chat, and you can email me, I can email you that. Anna Raymaker for Detroit, and I gotta get the young lady's name for Ann Arbor VA. But so
Thank
she
you.
doesn't have to be registered with VA. They'll get her squared away. So,
Okay, thank you.
yep.
Any other questions?
Put my email in there. You might want to email me, resource, or you want me to try to connect with
Melanie?
Yeah, I guess my question would be, which this was a great presentation and thank you for your time. It was wonderful to learn about the aspect of being a veteran with PTSD, which I don't understand. So thank you for giving that perspective. I guess my question is, are there any trainings or presentations or more talk about complex or compound PTSD within like domestic violence survivors or children, children who have been abused survivors? Do you know of any of those going on, or would you consider like talking more about that, I guess, at a future presentation?
To answer the first, I'm not aware. So when you get into those specific houses, so to speak, I'm thinking, like, for instance, Haven may have more of a domestic violence training that the rest of the populace may not, be familiar with. So I can look into that, even reach out to Haven. They may have, I know Care House Oakland County, they focus on children that experience sexual trauma. So they may have, I know they have different trainings on how to prevent, and they have the actual therapy as well. So they may have. So I'd have to pull, or reach out to those folks and kind of see what do they have, or can you go there, or can they send folks your way? So.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious, just because I hadn't seen any since working in the field, and this is kind of my first presentation that I've seen put out there about PTSD at all. So I was excited to see that, and just curious if you knew of any others. But I'm glad to have joined this one. It was very informative. So thank you so much for that.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
In the chat, there is a resource, and I was also going to share a resource here if anyone wants further training on the military population. There's a website and a whole group through, I'm forgetting the school in Indiana, but it's called STAR Behavioral Health, and there's a 3-tier training program that you can attend to first understand military culture. Once you attend the first 2 trainings, then the tier 3, you can go into specifics. Myself, actually, I was trained through there for prolonged exposure therapy. They have other things on CBT for suicidality, especially with veterans and things of that nature. So if anyone is looking more into those trainings, I highly recommend those trainings. And you can actually go on there to see a registry of those clinicians who have been trained on that. And I actually received referrals when I was working for our CPAs at the time to have active military members or veterans to service as a clinician at the time through that too. So I always highly recommend those trainings as well.
Thank you, Adam, for that. Definitely.
Are there any other comments or feedback? And if you hear my child trying not to go to sleep, I apologize if you can hear that in the background. He does not want bedtime now. If not, you guys, their evaluation is in the chat. Please take the time to fill it out. I know some people aren't able to access the chat if you're using the website versus the app. I will send that out to everyone who registered on that whole email chain. I will also send the eval out there as well, as I think that helped a little bit last time too. Remember, please complete the evaluation, and though you can receive your CEU McBAP credit certificate. It takes usually about up to 2 weeks for our training department to get all the certificates emailed out. Make sure in the evaluation you use the email you want the certificate sent to. That is where the certificate will go. What else with that? Also in that email with the eval, you will see our next community workshop on the SUD topic of trauma and recovery as well. That's another trauma training that's specifically related to the SUD community. That is April, oh, now I'm going to blank. So I believe 11th. Let me just double check that really quick. It's the second Thursday. Yes, April 11th at 6:30. You can register as the same way you register for this training on our Oakland CHN website under trainings and SUD community workshops. If there aren't any further questions, we will stay on to make sure the eval does work, and I'll send that email quickly here. But we appreciate everyone and everyone saying thank you to Chaka. It was a great training, job well done. I'm always so interested. My sub-concentration, so I guess my minor in my graduate degree was military specialty. So I got to work with military populations. So that is a near and dear population to my heart. My brother is a veteran Navy SEAL, my dad veteran Navy, my brother veteran Air Force. So it is a special population to me as well. So I always am happy to hear these presentations as we are able to host them. So thank you guys for spending your Thursday night with us. I will get the eval sent out to you. And if you are done and have no other questions or comments, have a great evening.